As a wellness coach, I get to help people.
NASM has invested in creating this program with the leading minds in neuroscience, movement, positive psychology, sleep, nutrition. You will learn a unique understanding of wellness. And I'm excited for you to take this course because there is nothing else like it in the fitness and wellness industries today. This is the course that I wanted 5 years ago, a gift in my mind to an industry that is thirsty for more.
Well, hello there, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall, and I want to take you back to November of 2019. So, a younger, more innocent time for us all, but certainly for me. I was a grad student at the time, and I'm driving north from New York City on a phone call that I'm not being too hyperbolic to say that it changed my life. This 90-minute phone call was a conversation with today's guest that really changed the way that I thought about myself and what I was capable of and what I believed that I wanted to do, honestly, with my life and how I could more completely live my purpose. And part of that conversation was convincing me by insisting, this guest completely insisting that I had to start a podcast. So I mean it when I say that Better Than Fine would not exist without today's guest, because when someone who has worked for M. Night Shyamalan tells you that you've got a message that the world needs to hear, well, you listen. And so I listened, and that's why you can listen right now. So I'm honored to have today's guest on the show for the first time, partly because of her deep wisdom, her insight, her original ideas, and also because I'm honored just to have her here because she's the reason the show exists at all. So my guest today is an expert in media and wellness. She's a wellness coach as well, and she also has a master's degree in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, where she's also an assistant instructor. She has been a thesis advisor. She's helped countless people interested in positive psychology to incubate their ideas and then figure out how to carry them out into the world. But that's not what she's here to talk about today. I'm going to let her explain it a bit. But Mika Opp, my friend, my mentor, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Better Than Fine.
Oh my gosh, Darlene, that is what a beautiful introduction. And it's an honor to be here with you. And I want to just take that and keep that as a gift for the rest of my life, really, that gift of gratitude. And I also just want to say that there's no point in trying to convince somebody of something if they're not going to do something about it. And so for me, the way that you were able to take what I had to offer and run with it has been nothing short of incredible, really. What happened that year was actually you and I both started a podcast, and I was going through a podcasting fellowship by Seth Godin, which was super exciting. And I was so fired up about it. And, you kind of showed me who you wanted to be in this world in your next incarnation. And it seemed so obvious to me that speaking and podcasting would be such a great medium for you. And part of what I wrote my master's thesis was had to do with the medium being the message. And so it seemed like the perfect medium for you. But fast forward to now, like when the pandemic hit, I was like, this isn't my thing anymore with my podcast, although I want to jump back into it with a different spin on it. But now look at what your podcast has done in that amount of time. And you've touched so many people. And I'm just so grateful that you actually were open to seeing yourself in a new way, but then actually just taking action. And if everybody, listening to this knows you, they know that you are nothing if not a woman of action. So I want to fangirl right back at you because you've been a mentor for me as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for saying so. And I didn't prep Mika, to the listener. I didn't prep Mika at all that I was gonna like put her out on positive blast there.
Ruin my
Um,
mascara.
yeah, right. I started to feel mine run a little bit, but I think when it's something that you've just said highlights that one of the things I really love about being in the positive psychology space and the wellness space is there's so many people that no matter what your expertise is, there are other people that you're going to learn from, and you learn from each other. And one thing I have definitely learned with you, I'm not going to say from you, I'm going to say with you, has been that mutual mentorship, because the pivot that we have taken in our relationship from, you were clearly mentoring and guiding me into mutual nurturing, I think is the phrase I'm hunting for here. And that's been really rewarding. And I think something that anybody listening could take a lesson from, perhaps.
I love that. And yeah, it takes a lot of humility, I think, from on both sides to be able to change the relationship and adapt with it. And many of the people that have come through the MAP program have become my friends, even though technically I was one of their instructors. Um, and likewise, I've been able to make friends with some of my instructors, and it's wonderful that it can just become this new kind of language that we share together, and context that we share, and that acts as a jumping off point for whatever is to come. So I'm thrilled to be here and very proud to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's pivot then to what you are here for. Even
Sure.
though you're an expert in media and positive media specifically, a few months ago we hopped on the phone and you shared with me this concept that, sometimes I feel like an idea gets introduced to us and it's such a clear bell ringer where someone gives language to a set of ideas that have been kind of humming in the background. And it really resonated with me so strongly, which is why I thought now was the time for you to come on. Can you share with us this idea? What is chronic wellness?
Sure. Well, I've been on a healing journey for a long time now. I was thinking about and trying to figure out how long I've been on a healing journey. And it's been over 15 years, probably closer to 20 years. And during that time, you just start to on a long journey of healing. And I'm actually already framing it in a positive way when I say that, because really, what it starts out as is like a not even a journey, and it just feels like a death sentence. It feels like any diagnosis that you might get is delivered to you in a way that makes it feel as if this is the end of something, and that you're just going to be sick or limited for the rest of your life. And so for me, there's been a stepping up of the reframe over the years, to create not just more like functionality, but more openness and ability to take on even new information and take the game to kind of the next level, leveling up as I go. And so I guess it became sort of this healing journey. And then now I think of it as a journey of chronic wellness. And I use that phrase because we're usually talking about it in terms of chronic illness. And so we even think about the word chronic as a bad thing, but actually chronic is something is like a routine or a ritual, and that's can be a really good thing. And it's a journey of wellness. Just because our healthcare system isn't necessarily set up to promote wellness, you and I both know that it's a priority to cultivate wellness. And so I think making it something that is ritualized or habitualized, or that we think of and conceptualize as chronic, in a positive way, kind of reminds us that this is something that we want to put work in every day to creating our own wellness. And when I talk about chronic wellness, I'm talking about it as kind of a reframe of chronic illness. And I'm thinking about it more in terms of like the psychological and even spiritual and emotional side of it, not so much the physical part of it. So this is more about like, how do we think about this journey that we're on, in a way that's an empowering way. And you and I talked in that conversation about the placebo effect. And we know that, the way that we think about something has a direct effect on our body, and especially our immune system. So being told that you're going to live with chronic illness for the rest of your life is the worst thing that you could really be told. So I think when you're given some kind of diagnosis, you have the opportunity to reframe it in a way that's constructive. So that's what I'm trying to do. And this is really an evolving framework for cultivating well-being through the process of chronic illness.
Yeah. I love what it opens up when I think about these ideas. So you're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall. My guest is Mika Opp, and we're talking about chronic wellness. And Mika, when you first started telling me about this, we talked about, you just mentioned chronic illness, and that so often in the wellness space, wellness initiatives are marketed as, illness avoidance or illness symptom mitigation, right? Like we're sold this idea of like, oh, take these supplements and you won't get, dementias or Alzheimer's and diabetes or whatever.
Yeah.
Or take these other supplements or do these other practices and they'll help with depression, anxiety, And you and I both know that is the opposite of a positive psychology framing, right? Like we look for the additive positive framing. And that's really part of what made this resonate for me is as somebody who was diagnosed in my early 20s, 15 years for me, 20 years for you, with, I'm going to put it in quotes here, a chronic illness.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
That I was essentially given the framework of symptom mitigation from a pretty young adulthood. And this idea of perpetuating wellness as its framework. So, thank you for bringing it into the world. Do you mind sharing with us a bit about how we might approach our chronic wellness? Like, how do we flip this switch from an illness mentality to a wellness mentality? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So I, like many people in the positive psychology world, have constructed an acronym to
of course, there's a million acronyms.
Yes, there's so many acronyms, and I was like, don't do an acronym. And I'm like, no, I need a way of thinking about this and talking about this. And it was cool because like when you create an acronym, there's actually websites where you can put in, the different words and see what pops up. And one of the first words was graces. And I'm like, that's perfect. Because that's really how it feels to me, is like these graces that are the constituent elements of what I think of as chronic wellness. So I can talk you through that acronym.
Yes, please.
So the graces stands for grief, restoration, alignment, compassion, energy, and surrender. So I'll just start with grief. So grief, I think, is one of the first steps in the sense that when you are given some kind of diagnosis, or when you're bumping up against the limitations of your physical body or your emotional capacity, or whatever the limit is, you begin to see that some possibilities are being cut off from this life path for you. And grieving is a natural process. I think we don't want to grieve when we're ill because we want to stay hopeful. But what I find is that you create more space for hope when you let yourself grieve. And so you're grieving who you thought you might be able to be. You're grieving, the FOMO of things that you might have missed in the past. You're grieving a certain trajectory. And what that will allow you to do is kind of sort of yes and it, you know what I mean? Where you're like, okay, so then you're kind of putting a period on that and saying like, that is what it is. Now, it doesn't mean it's not going to change. It could be that you have a miraculous recovery and you're able to be an NBA star. But also, like, if that doesn't happen, you've now kind of processed it and moved through it. So you're at a place to be open to what is possible. So that is, it's like being your own witness too.
It reminds me, last week we did pragmatic optimism. That was last week's episode. And, the first step in pragmatic optimism is you have to be honest about the situation you're in. And I think even for clients I can think of who haven't been diagnosed with chronic illnesses, stepping into a proactive wellness journey does sometimes come with a bit of grief. I can think of clients who, have struggled with yo-yo dieting, right? And the things that they've been taught to want about how their body looks or
Yeah.
how other people perceive their body and their embodiment, and letting go of the dream they've been sold often involves a bit of grief. And I could see where that would be a really useful set of tools, regardless of someone's medical status. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, grief is something that we all need to learn anyway, because people that we love are going to die, full
Yeah.
stop. And I think grief is actually something that we've been wrestling with the last couple of years, as,
Yeah.
as a planet. And it's really, I think, a muscle in a way. I don't know if that's the right way to talk about it, but it feels like you can get better at grieving. Um, I kind
Yeah.
of
It's a
don't want to do
process.
that because I don't want more things to grieve to come into my path.
Yeah.
But over the past couple years, I've grieved a couple people that I've lost, and dreams that I had, and I've made new dreams. But it's like, I know that there's still going to be a lot of grief in the future, because you just look around and people that you love will die. And so I think it's something to kind of invest in anyway, apart from the chronic illness journey. And I think part of that too is like, the other sort of part of that G is gratitude, because
Hmm.
you sort of become grateful for the stuff that you can do. So it's like
Yes.
gratitude instead of expectations, or progress over perfection, because you're just like, I went for a hike today, and
Yeah, I can walk today.
yes, exactly. I walked
I
to
had a
the
day
store.
last week I couldn't walk, and you want to talk about learn to appreciate the little stuff. Have some kind of lapsing remitting illness that causes you to periodically not be able to like walk. I couldn't make dinner last week. I had to call Matt and be like, "You got to bring something home because I can't stand long enough."
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
I love the idea of gratitude or any kind of appreciation and grief being intertwined, right? Because so often we talk about grief in our society as focusing on the mourning. But one of my very good friends just lost, her person very, very suddenly a couple of months ago. And we had a call this morning and we were talking about how much storytelling and humor is happening among their community, and that's the appreciation that you knew that person at all. You had someone to love like that, right? And
yeah.
to have that appreciation when we're talking about chronic wellness for the things that do work, right? Like I have the form of EDS that's not going to kill me. I'll just be uncomfortable the rest of my life. I can appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you very soft skin.
There are so many gifts in the darkness. There really are. And I'm not like spiritual bypass or light washing or whatever.
No, no.
That's part of what grief is, I think, is like going down and really exploring like the darkness of what's going on. I mean, it sucks to not be able to walk upstairs when you're like in your 20s. And,
Yeah.
I mean, and that said, like, even when you say that, the other part of you is going, yeah, but look at these other people that were there when I had to like get my blood drawn, or like when I went to the hospital and I saw this, these people going through something way worse. And that's actually one of the beautiful things about chronic illness too, is that you end up just by nature of it being in places where there are a lot of sick people. And so you do have gratitude. So while you're grieving what you don't have, you're grateful for what you do have. So it's sort of like
Yes.
two sides of the same coin.
Yes. Strong agree. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall. My guest is Mika Opp, and we are talking about chronic wellness. And so Mika is walking us through her Graces model. And the first G we've decided is not just grief, but also gratitude. So Mika, take me to the R. What's the R?
Sure. So that would be restoration, restorative practices. And you and I also have talked about this before. And I love that you are exploring that too on Better Than Fine, because a lot of people just think that exercise is just all go, go, go. And there's a whole side of it, as you know, that is restorative. And so we're trained to find the effort, and we need to retrain ourselves to find the ease. And so that's what restorative practices are about. So things like a warm Epsom bath over a cold plunge, for example, or yin yoga over Bikram yoga, walking over running. This isn't for everybody, right? This is for people who know that they have a certain capacity and they're trying to condition their parasympathetic system. This is something that needs to be conditioned, because otherwise you're going to run the same old patterns you've always been running. So I think of these as like elevated habits or magic habits, taking habits and making them kind of adding something a little more to them. So for example, like you could think of sleep as a spiritual ritual, or you could think of like the way that you're processing emotions as something that's really good for your body. There's definitely like journaling prompts and things that are meant to heal your body. For example, the whole John Sarno healing back pain, that whole model.
Yeah.
Right. So it's about conditioning that parasympathetic state, so that your neural pathways aren't firing out pain signals. So
and for the listener, so your sympathetic nervous system is like upregulated, fight or flight, stress reactive, and your parasympathetic nervous system. And when I teach this to baby trainers, I teach it like it's a parachute. It's bringing you back down. So parasympathetic. Yeah, you like that one?
I like that. That'll help you too, because it's confusing.
Parasympathetic is the parachute that safely brings you to ground. And so that's your rest, digest, sleep, reproduce, like all of these functions that our ancestors wouldn't have done if they were like afraid for their lives. And so we need our parasympathetic nervous system to be high functioning in order to heal the body. But oftentimes those of us who've grown up in trauma or chronic stress, or we've just gotten a really scary diagnosis, the on switch is all the way up to 12. And then those healing restorative practices that Mika, you're alluding to, can't work if the parasympathetic nervous system isn't doing its deal, because you can't get there. And so, I love the idea that, there's movement, but there's also mindfulness. There's all of these other ways to recondition that parasympathetic tone, as you were saying.
Yeah. And for me, the importance of this actually came out, I'm a big fan, but Tony Robbins, I was at one of his trainings, and he talks a lot about conditioning your state, and to me, this is like, well, what kind of, and I think that's also for upregulation, like when you want to, you want to be like vibrant and all that stuff, but you can also condition a calm state. And so when you're healing, you really want to try to do that. And also I would say like the part of this is like giving yourself, and this kind of goes into the next part, but like is giving yourself permission to, let's say, okay, I heard about Wim Hof from somebody while I was in, deep in my healing journey. I didn't really get into my story and my symptoms, but I had a symptom where it was pretty noticeable. I had dermatitis all over my face, and somebody mentioned that Wim Hof, not just breath work, but also cold plunges. And I did do one, and I ended up in serious back pain for days as a result. And it for me, because of adrenal stuff and shingles and a whole bunch of other stuff, that was not a good thing to do. For somebody else, that could be a really good thing to do if you have a certain level of healing already accomplished, or that the Wim Hof stuff might be really great for you, but kind of knowing that it's okay to just be like, that part doesn't work for me. And what might be like the flip side of that, where I'm still using water and I'm still like breathing, but I'm breathing in a more restorative way, and I'm using water in a more restorative way, like an Epsom salt bath or something like that.
Yeah, I think, this brings up two things I want to highlight for our listeners. And the first is, one of the things I love about coaching is that it's not prescriptive. Right. And so I might give you information about how cold plunge works versus hot bath. And then it's up to you to look at, okay, these are my symptoms. These are my lived experience. You know what? That's not going to work for me. And as a coach, I'm not attached to that outcome. I'm here to make the container, not make the choices. And the other thing is that, the dose is the medicine, right? So there's unquestionably a point in my own path where cold plunges were causing muscle spasms, and then I would be in pain in the way you're describing. And now for me, cold plunges are a way that I can upregulate and help with focus, because if I'm too all over the place and overstimulated, it upregulates your dopamine. So for somebody, it might help with their neurodivergence, whereas somebody else, it, scrambles a signal and they can't function for a few days. And recognizing that when we present these tools as if they are ubiquitous for everyone, we're doing a great disservice to everyone else's wellness journey.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of one of the skills and qualities that you get out of going through a chronic illness journey is that you become this N of one, and you have to be willing to stand inside of contradictions and even mystery to find out your path, and using your own personal experience as a pathway to truth, to finding truth, is not something that we're encouraged to do in our society. And that actually brings me to the third piece, which would be alignment. And this is like alignment in terms of finding your own path, but also kind of like your North Star, so your trajectory. And that could be a different asset, if you will, for different people. So one of the things I recently came across, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks, and I shared this with you on our call, was the construct called psychological richness. And I think that has some really nice gifts when it comes to the chronic wellness journey, because, even if that wasn't your North Star to begin with, which I think for me it was, and, maybe I created this chronic illness journey and because it's psychologically rich, but it certainly does have, psychological richness embedded in it. And because there's high highs and there's low lows. And
can you unpack what psychological richness is for our leaders?
Well,
for our listeners?
Yeah, and I don't have it like perfectly top of mind, but it's a new psychological construct that is, like we have PERMA, which is Seligman, and we have psychological we have different well-being frameworks, right? For what is happiness or what is well-being. We can measure it in lots of ways: positive affect, negative affect, etc. Well, psychological richness is another framework for well-being. Basically, some people are more naturally inclined to seek out a depth of experience than other people, and that's where they derive their happiness or well-being from. So it's not necessarily like relationships or some of these other constituent elements that are in these other frameworks.
Yeah, it's like deep understanding and a full openness to experience of one's life, and that you want to explore. I think of it, I used to be an actor. And so, of course, I think of it the way I used to think about, like, well, I want to try everything so that I have a lot I can pull from when I'm building a character.
Exactly.
But then I realized, like, oh, no, I don't care about the character part. I just want to try everything.
Yes. So, and the thing is, it's like, to somebody that has that, they might think that's obvious, but that's not the way everybody finds well-being, and like I'm here traveling to dozens of countries in, which is part of like how I ended up getting sick. But that was for me super exciting and stuff. And the reality is that's still a part of a chronic wellness journey, is that you do have these psychologically rich experiences. So that is, that is one North Star that you could potentially have. For you, it might be like growth. It might be meaning. It might be evolution. So I heard a great quote: when you don't have your body, you have your spirit. And imagine when you really feel like, and this is also, something that needs to be reframed, but like, if you feel as if your body has turned on you or let you down, then what do you have left? You have your spirit. And I use spirit, and, it could be a religious or non-religious way, or, but just something larger than yourself. And that becomes kind of like your focus a little bit. And I believe that there are spiritual gifts that come out of dealing with chronic illness for a long time, as I'm sure you might agree.
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, we don't talk about a ton of woo-woo here on BTF, but I definitely agree that, I said it back in December. We had the interview show where we had the takeover, and somebody asked for my origin story. And I said, then I would not be who I am, and I would not do the things I do, and I would not have my sense of purpose and meaning and calling if I didn't have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, right? Like, it's been so pivotal to my evolution as a person. And it sounds like for you and a lot of your revelations and your wellness journey and what you've been working on, the same is true for you. And this path that you have been, I was going to say walking and marching, but sometimes like, crawling and taking a nap.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that's another piece of, I think, alignment is the way that we use language. So so it's kind of reorienting yourself around the illness, the way you talk about it. Like, I know that there's a big, a lot of people would say like cancer warrior, but like, what if you were a healing goddess, or what if, instead of a battle, it's a journey. So just little things like that, where, we start to experience things differently when we start to reframe them. And we know this from even some of the research, in the cleaning ladies, in the mindset research, where it's like, when you reconceptualize something as exercise, you actually burn more calories and all that stuff. So imagine if you're reframing your chronic illness as chronic wellness, or if you're reframing, being a warrior, to, let's say, like being a goddess, or whatever you want to say, that's going to help you experience the world in a more productive way. So I think of it as like renaming your experience it's like reclaiming your narrative. And that's one piece, is kind of hacking your own language.
Yeah. So the alignment piece, I think I want to highlight, because I think I know you well enough to know that what we're saying is not, well, you can't be a warrior because that's too aggro.
Yeah.
We're saying whatever the language is that truly authentically aligns
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
you and your path and your journey.
Yeah.
Taking the time to, like, taking the psychological richness to consider that with intentionality helps to align toward a sustained wellness state. Yeah.
Absolutely. And yes, definitely. And I think too, like, having lots of tools in your toolkit, and even in language, because sometimes you need to be a warrior. Like, make no mistake, sometimes that is the right language. You know what I mean? But also, like, calling yourself a warrior means you're always going to have to fight a battle in a way. So it's, you know what I mean? It's creating a context around you. And sometimes that's just the context you're in, and you're in a battle. And sometimes you're not in a battle, but you're saying you're a warrior. And so it's just like something to be mindful of,
Yeah. Yeah. That language creates part of our reality. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall. My guest is Mika Opp. We are talking about chronic wellness. And as we continue to explore this acronym, I want to highlight that while Mika and I might be talking about, our spoonie journeys, spoonie is a thing that people with chronic illness typically call ourselves. I think a lot of what you're sharing, Mika, could be benefit to anybody on any wellness journey. It doesn't only have to be those who've had a diagnosis, because I think so many of us, what we're looking for, if chronic is sustained, we're looking for sustained states of wellness and well-being. I think, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is self-compassion, because self-compassion is something that, and I know you've talked about this before on the show, but it's really one of the tools that kind of got me through this process. And one of the pillars inside of that is what you're talking about. It's like common humanity. We all go through things that are hard. That's just a part of being human. So along with the common humanity piece, there's mindfulness, and then treating yourself as you would treat someone you love, or care and concern. So those are the three pieces of self-compassion. And that's the work of Dr. Kristen Neff. And she also has a framework called Fierce Self-Compassion, which I've trained in. And to your point of like being a warrior, sometimes that self-compassion needs to be fierce. And a lot of times that shows up as either asking for accommodation or boundaries. Like, what are your non-negotiables? What saying no, and paring down to like what you really need. So that's actually the next piece of the puzzle is compassion. So, and then
we've got grief and gratitude, align. Sorry, I skipped the R. Grief and gratitude, restoration, alignment, compassion. Okay. Yes. And anybody who wants to dive into self-compassion, there is an episode from April of 2022. That's a whole exploration of self-compassion and Kristen Neff's work. So, awesome. All right. So what's our next?
The next would be energy. And it's sort of just like super simple. At the end of the day, you have you have like choices all day long. So the easy way to think about it, if you're on this journey, is, does this help or harm? Because you sort of have just like a finite amount of energy each day. And when you really, like, when you think about it, is this going to make me have more energy or less energy? And it's fine if you want to like spend those energy coins, but just know that you're doing it and you might want to do it. Like for me, going on a roller coaster, well, that's like, I protect my adrenals really well, but sometimes it's worth going on a roller coaster with my child. You know what I mean? Or seeing a scary movie, like seeing Lord of the Rings, but I'm not going to go see like just a ton of scary stuff or, but there's certain things where it's worth it to me. So that's because this is kind of also like once you've done the research, your protocols, you've experimented, you have your routine that works for you, but now it's just this heuristic of like, does it help or does it harm? And another piece of the energy equation would be like, again, streamlining, simplifying, things like that in your life where you can, and also creating community, because people can help fill in the gaps on your energy meter, or they can fill up your tank. People can also drain your tank. So that's, yeah.
I love the idea of boundaries being part of energy, right? When I teach self-care, boundaries is often the hardest part for people to grasp when we're talking about practices that, if meaningful self-care is the routine meeting of your human needs, but you don't have the boundaries to say no to people who are taking up the time and space that you need in order to eat well or get enough sleep or practice mindfulness or whatever, right? A lot of the wellness tools take up time.
Yeah.
But you have to have boundaries and you have to have strong no's in order to have meaningful yeses. So that to me is such an important part of this energy exchange that we call time and life.
Yes.
And what's the S?
And the S is surrender. So I believe that healing is not something that you achieve. It's an ongoing process of regeneration. Surrender is taking action off of its pedestal. And I've heard it said that healing is biased to like the feminine side, the feminine energies. It's like taking time for yourself, like honoring your cycles, going within, having your off days, as opposed to just like achievement, goal orientation, that kind of thing. Not to say that you don't have to take action in order to set up a healing like process for yourself. But it's kind of like letting yourself regenerate and surrender. And surrender is not just passive. It requires a choice. It requires agency. So a lot of people think it's just like, oh, you're just waving the white flag or whatever. But really, when you think about it, well, that takes action. That's a choice that somebody made to stand up on the hill, get the white flag and like raise it. That's an active stance. It's a regenerative stance. So it's like embracing being overdoing when you can, because you can't always do that, but when you can, giving yourself permission. And acceptance also kind of paradoxically leads to less stress. And we know that less stress is better for healing. So another part of that would be like thinking about growth, because when we measure ourselves, like if we surrender, we're kind of like, oh, well, what am I achieving when I'm doing nothing, right? In quotes. But it's kind of has to do with how you measure growth, because growth could be something like your blood work changing. It could be getting a reward or an achievement or doing something you weren't able to do. But it's also can be like an internal change, like new perspective shift, a new habit, a new like practice, like a gratitude practice, or like some kind of emotional growth or something like that. So it's also like surrendering to a new way of thinking about growth.
Yeah, I think you and I have talked about before that I have such a weird relationship with the word surrender, right? Because on the one hand, like you're saying, oh, it's waving the right flag, it's giving up. But at the same time, right, if we go back to that pragmatic optimism, you have to be honest with yourself about where you're at and what you need and the tangible physical realities that we all are under. And I know it's been very difficult for me in the course of my own journey to think. I've come to think about surrender more like plants growing, right? Like,
yes.
Like a plant is not growing because it's choosing to put out. I always think of pumpkins for some reason, right? Have you ever grown pumpkins, Mika?
No. Oh my gosh, I would love to. Like I want to be Cinderella with pumpkins.
Well, you live in Mika also lives in upstate New York. So you live in
Yes.
upstate New York, like let's grow some pumpkins.
Yes.
So I grow pumpkins every year, and they have these very creepy vines that it seems like nothing's happening, and all of a sudden the vines grow a lot, and then all of a sudden you've got a ton of buds, but you have to have like the right ratio of male buds to female buds, and then like a couple days later you'll have like these little bulbs that are forming underneath the buds, and that's the new baby pumpkin. But that didn't happen because anybody forced it. It happened because like that's what pumpkins do. And
Yeah.
sometimes the surrender piece is allowing your body and your nervous system and all the other symptoms of your body and your mind and your spirit and your energy. Sometimes they just need to stop
Yeah.
and breathe
Yeah.
and do their jobs without the pressure of all this other stuff just getting heaped onto the pile.
Yeah.
And I know I've told you this story, like going to Thailand to study yoga and just having a complete meltdown during my yoga teacher training, where I was like, okay, this is it. This is when I'm just going to lose my mind. And that was the moment that I was like, oh, this is what they mean by surrender. Cool. Got it. I literally needed to go to the other side of the planet to figure that out. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of us, it just takes a while, Mika.
And also there's that, the symbology of like a diamond, where it's like the creating the pressure in the dark, and or like a seed underground, or there's things happening. There's magical, mystical, transmutational things happening that, when you emerge out the other side, like there is growth there. It's just not what we think of, as progress necessarily.
Yeah. There's so much here. So let's recap. So we've got grief and gratitude. Take me through it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's grief and gratitude. Restoration or restorative practices. That's about finding the ease. Alignment, and that includes language. Compassion, and that's mainly self-compassion. But you can't be on this journey without having compassion for other people going through the same thing. And I do think that suffering builds a depth, which kind of gets filled up with compassion. So,
and also I think compassion for the people who are walking it with us.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
yeah. Oh my gosh. That's a really good point. Yeah.
I think the people that have had to give up or go without or go less or change their life course to care for others, it's a big gift that they give. And sometimes it's very difficult for them, right?
That's a
Sorry
really
to
good
derail.
point. No, that's a really good point. I mean, and I think that's part of grief too, is like you can almost even grieve too for what other people were hoping for, from you. And, that's another piece of it, but I love that. Yeah. And then the last two would be the energy equation of like, does this help or harm? And surrender, the being overdoing.
I love it.
Yeah. So, and it's, I just wanted to say too, that, there's obviously other pieces of a journey of wellness and well-being that we both know. There's so many pieces, and it's really like, what are you trying to cultivate? For me, when I wrote my master's thesis, I wrote it about positive media. And I almost want to use that in quotes, because it was like, well, what would that even mean? Is that just like rainbows and butterflies, or like what actually is that? And, so for me, like as we move more and more forward technologically, I think there's this other piece is like, how are we using technology? And I'm still really interested in that, like, because it's our tools, our tools in the world, and we're using technology so much of the time now that's become even more important, sort of positive media literacy, if you will. And so I think having intentions all the way along your journey, like both for your process and for your outcome, can be really useful on the chronic wellness journey, but also like when you're using different tools, or even when you're interacting with nature, whatever it is, it could be nature, it could be technology, is kind of having these intentions for both your process, like what you're trying to get out of it, and your outcome. Because, for example, like humor, if you have the intention of humor, you're going to make a different choice about, what TV show to watch, for example, or, if your intention is like learning, you might listen to a podcast instead of, instead of watch YouTube videos or whatever the case may be. And I think that in and of itself is just like something that we can take with us on our journeys, both in and out of the technological and media world.
Yeah, I think you're really onto something there, because so often in the wellness space, in the well-being space, right, we're being reactive to some content that we've seen, right? Like, oh, I'm going to try ashwagandha because everybody's talking about it all the time, even though I can't even pronounce it or spell it properly. Because we're reactive consumers instead of these really intentional practitioners. And so much of what we've talked about today has been about the intentionality of, okay, instead of, oh, I'm going to go on my wellness journey because I don't want to get sick, or I'm going to go on my chronic illness spoony warrior journey because I'm going to fight against my diagnosis and prognosis or whatever, as opposed to like, I'm going to do the best I can with what I've got right now.
Yeah.
And that's going to grow a different future for me and for everyone who loves me and for everyone I love. And let's see where that takes me. And that's where I think that, if somebody asked me the other day, like, what would I go back and tell my younger self if I could? And like, this is one of those lessons where it's like, I want to go back 15 years to, being diagnosed, Darlene, and tell her like, okay, this woman, Mika Opp, says chronic wellness instead of chronic illness. Think about that. You'll meet her in 15 years. Chill out. I think it could be really helpful.
Yeah, I'm glad. And I mean, my intention in this is really like, this is kind of just started for me with like my own experiences. I can't possibly think that this is like the end of the road. That just didn't work for me, and that really shouldn't work for anyone. And I don't like that that's how we talk about these things with people, because, and I know, some people in our community, a positive psychology community, are really excited about this idea of agency right now. And like, but this is using agency to look at your trajectory of your healing, your body, mind, spirit system. And that's not necessarily something that we're taught to do. We're usually taught to kind of give our power over to experts. And we really need to be, we are the only expert on ourselves. And I don't mean that doctors can't give you, of course they're experts in like these niche areas, but for the sum totality of who you are and what works for you, you're the only expert, And so giving people permission to kind of curate that journey for themselves. And also I think self-love, self-compassion is just a huge part of it, because until you have that, you're just like making things worse. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Or at the very least, holding the reactive line, right? Like, okay, I'm going through the protocol because it's what I've been taught, but I'm doing it because I should.
Yeah.
Instead of, I think that's part of your alignment piece, right? It's the alignment with an appreciation for authentic self and what it is that you actually want for you, and removing some kind of external moral obligation and what's really true.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Mika, how can people find you?
So you can DM me on Instagram if you want to reach out. It's at mbk.op. I also have one for chronic wellness, but I can't remember the name. So if you drop me a follow, I will send you my, I have special social media feeds for different things. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this framework, but if you have any, suggestions, like if it's helpful for you, reach out to me. If you want to hop on a call, just send me a message up there. That would be great. So it's at mbk.opp.
Thank you so much, Mika, for joining me. And it's such an honor to get to have you here on Better Than Fine. It means a lot to me.
This has been such an honor. I love you so much.
I love you too very much. And we love you, our dear listeners. And we would also love to hear any feedback that you might have. And so the best ways to do that would be to drop me an email. It's info@darlene.coach. You could find me on Instagram. I'm also darlene.coach. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. And I also have a new Substack coachdar.substack.com is a repository for information, a lot of it being tools we talk about on not just this episode, but on the show in general, so that you've got some free resources that compile a lot of these ideas. And of course, I hope that you've subscribed. If you're watching on YouTube, give it that like button. And wherever you are listening, please go ahead and leave us a review, hopefully 5 stars, because that's going to help us to game the algorithm and help to spread the show. Always so grateful to have you listening to us here on Better Than Fine. And thank you. Be well.